The smile was already on his face. The kind of smile that comes only after 18 months of work. After 100 meetings in rooms like this one. After negotiations that had broken, then healed, then broken again. After the kind of patience that most people mistake for stubbornness. Malcolm Reed stood behind a long table draped in dark blue velvet, 40 stories above Manhattan, with a gold fountain pen in his hand and everything he had spent 2 years building arranged perfectly around him. Investors smiled back at him. Cameras lined the rear wall. Reporters waited with notebooks open. He lowered the pen toward the signature line. Sign that, and you'll walk into a trap. The smile vanished. The entire ballroom went still. Crystal chandeliers continued glowing above polished oak tables. The Manhattan skyline shimmered through floor-to-ceiling glass. 300 people sat exactly where they had been sitting 1 second earlier. But the air in the room had changed completely. Malcolm lifted his gaze slowly. Standing near the front row was a small girl. No older than 8. Dark braids framing a face that carried an expression no 8-year-old should need to carry. She clutched a worn notebook against her chest with both hands. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't searching for a reaction. She was looking at the contract the way someone looks at a thing they know is dangerous. What did you say? Malcolm asked. His voice came out quietly. More quietly than he intended. The room seemed to shrink around the question. Even the cameras stopped moving. The girl swallowed once. If you sign that, she said, pointing toward the document, you'll walk into a trap. A ripple of disbelief moved through the audience. Confused whispers. Nervous glances. Beside the signing table, Evelyn Carter adjusted the sleeve of her cream-colored blazer. Her expression stayed calm. Composed. Almost perfect. She even managed a small laugh. Mr. Reed, she said smoothly, she's a child. I'm certain there's been a misunderstanding. Several heads nodded immediately. The explanation was reasonable. Comfortable. But Malcolm was no longer looking at Evelyn. He was looking at her hands. For just 1 second, less than a second, Evelyn's fingers had tightened around the folder she was holding. The knuckles faint. The grip brief. Then the smile returned. Perfectly positioned. Perfectly controlled. Malcolm looked down at the contract. Hundreds of lines of legal language. His team had reviewed everything. The board had approved it. 18 months of careful work were bound inside those pages. And yet the certainty he had felt 30 seconds ago was already somewhere else. Why would you say that? He asked the girl. She looked up at him. No fear in her eyes. Only urgency. The particular urgency of someone who doesn't have much time and knows it. A deep silence settled over the ballroom. The girl hugged the notebook tighter. I can't tell you here, she said quietly. If I tell you now. Her gaze moved briefly across the room, touching faces, settling nowhere. She'll run. The chandeliers kept glowing. The city kept sparkling beyond the glass. Somewhere in the back of the room, a camera shutter clicked. But nobody moved. Nobody spoke. And for the first time that night, Malcolm Reed understood that the most dangerous thing in this room might not be written inside the contract at all. Several seconds passed. Then a soft laugh broke the silence. Evelyn Carter stepped forward with the unhurried confidence of someone who has prepared for every possibility. Mr. Reed, she said, her voice warm and steady, I think everyone here understands that children sometimes misread adult situations. She offered a gentle smile around the room. Perhaps we should return to the matter at hand. A few nervous chuckles followed. Investors shifted. Reporters glanced at one another. Malcolm looked at Evelyn. Then at the girl. You said I'd walk into a trap, he said. Tell me what. Avery turned toward her. The girl lowered her gaze for a moment. The city lights reflected in the glass behind her. Manhattan traffic moved 40 floors below like thin lines of color. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm. Steady. I can't tell you here. Murmurs spread through the crowd immediately. Evelyn folded her arms. You see? There's no explanation because there's nothing. Wrong. That's not true, the girl said. No drama in it. No performance. Just a correction. Malcolm heard the difference immediately. Then explain it privately, Evelyn suggested. We can arrange that after the ceremony. Right now, contracts are waiting. She gestured gracefully toward the table. Several board members nodded. One of them checked his watch. A second quietly reminded Malcolm that multiple networks were broadcasting the signing in real time. Every minute of delay had a cost. Malcolm understood that. His entire career had been built on moving at the right speed. Yet something was different tonight. He looked at the contract again. The pages looked exactly as they had 10 minutes ago. Nothing had changed on the surface. Still, something had. The girl took one step forward. Don't sign it yet. Evelyn's smile tightened. Used slightly. Used enough. And why should I wait? Malcolm asked. The girl looked directly at him. Because if I tell you what I know right now, the person behind this will disappear before you can find the truth. The words landed differently than anything else had all evening. A faint rustle moved through the audience. Several people turned their heads almost involuntarily, instinctively looking around the ballroom. Evelyn laughed again, but the sound had lost some of its warmth. Malcolm slowly closed the leather folder containing the contract. The sound it made echoed through the room. A reporter near the front row immediately lowered his camera. Everyone seemed to understand what that gesture meant. Malcolm Reed was no longer preparing to sign. He was thinking. Really thinking. How much time do you need? He asked. The girl hesitated. Then answered. 10 minutes. A board member nearly rose from his chair. 10 minutes for what? The girl's eyes moved to the contract. Then briefly to someone else across the room. Someone Malcolm couldn't identify from where he was standing. 10 minutes, she said again, quietly. And don't let anyone leave. For the first time that evening, something crossed Evelyn Carter's face that her composure couldn't fully contain. It vanished almost immediately. But Malcolm had seen it. And suddenly, 10 minutes felt more valuable than $1 billion deal. A clock above the ballroom entrance began its countdown. 9 minutes. The room had changed. The celebration was gone. In its place, something tighter had taken over. A waiting that felt different from patience. The original document, the girl said quietly, looking at the signing table. Malcolm turned toward her. What about it? She held the notebook a little tighter. The one on the table is not the one that was reviewed 3 days ago. Murmurs swept the room immediately. Evelyn shook her head. That's impossible. Her answer came too fast. Malcolm noticed it. Several board members noticed it. You're saying the contract was changed, one of them asked. I'm saying somebody switched something, the girl replied. Evelyn let out a short laugh. Mr. Reed, we're taking legal advice from an 8-year-old child. A few people smiled nervously. Most did not. Malcolm looked at the contract. At Evelyn. Back at the girl. How would you know that? He asked. She opened the notebook. The pages were filled with careful handwriting. Dates. Observations. Notice written in a hand that was precise without being formal. She flipped through several pages before stopping near the middle. Tucked inside was a folded event program from that evening. Because I saw something. The room went still. Malcolm stepped closer. What did you see? She pointed toward the signing table. When everyone was watching the presentation, somebody replaced a stack of papers. Heads turned toward the table immediately. Malcolm felt a chill move through his chest. The presentation had lasted nearly 20 minutes. Every eye in the room had been fixed on the giant screens. Very few people would have been watching the documents. Who? A board member asked. I'm not sure, she said. Then she turned a page in the notebook. A sketch appeared. The signing table. Several people standing nearby. Chairs. Folders. Water glasses. One figure had been circled. I started drawing because I was bored, she admitted quietly. Then I noticed someone moved the papers. The ballroom went completely silent. Malcolm studied the sketch. It was remarkably detailed. The exact position of chairs. The arrangement of folders. The placement of every glass on the table. An attorney leaned forward immediately. Can we compare the reviewed copy with the current version? Evelyn answered before anyone else could. That's unnecessary. Several people looked directly at her. Malcolm did too. For the first time all evening, Evelyn looked away first. Then an assistant rushed toward the stage, tablet in hand, face pale. Mr. Reed. Her voice was almost a whisper. There's a problem. Malcolm felt his stomach drop. What is it? She swallowed. The original reviewed file cannot be located in the company database. The room erupted. Malcolm stared at her. What do you mean it cannot be located? It was there this afternoon, she said. Now it's gone. The girl quietly closed her notebook. The clock above the entrance continued counting down. 6 minutes remained. And for the first time, Malcolm understood that someone had already begun covering their tracks. 5 minutes. The silence had become heavy. Dense. The kind that presses against the ears. Malcolm turned toward Evelyn. The original file has disappeared from the database. Can you explain that? She kept her hands folded neatly in front of her. Her expression remained calm. At least on the surface. There are dozens of technical explanations, she said. Corrupted backups. Sync issues. Server errors. We shouldn't jump to conclusions. Reasonable. Professional. Todo professional. Board members exchanged looks across the table. Amara Johnson remained quiet. She watched everything. Every face. Every reaction. Every glance. Evelyn's gaze shifted briefly toward her. Mr. Reed, she said, her voice gentle, this entire situation began because a child made an accusation. Perhaps we should return to facts. I never accused anyone, Amara said. The room went silent. Evelyn's smile faded. Then what exactly are you doing, she asked. Amara looked directly at her. Trying to stop someone from making a mistake. Something in the quality of that answer held the room. Malcolm noticed the pause before Evelyn recovered. A board member leaned forward. If the reviewed file is missing, how do we verify the version on the table? The current copy is valid, Evelyn replied. How do you know? This time her answer came slightly slower. Malcolm watched. The confidence that had carried her through the evening was beginning to shift. Gradually. Subtly. But it was happening. Amara opened her notebook again. Pages turned under the ballroom lights until she stopped. She lifted the notebook and pointed toward a page dense with handwriting. The person who switched the documents stood near the table for less than 30 seconds. Evelyn folded her arms. And you measured that? Amara nodded. I was timing the presentation. Why? Malcolm asked. She hesitated. Because my mother always said important things happen when everybody is looking somewhere else. The words moved through the room without resistance. Malcolm felt something tighten in his chest. That wasn't imagination. That was experience. The kind earned by someone who had spent time paying attention to a world that didn't always pay attention back. Amara turned the notebook around. Time stamps ran down the page in a neat column. Presentation start. Video segment. Applause. Document movement. Every notation precise, every detail matching the event schedule. A board member stared at the notes. These times match what actually happened, he said. Almost exactly, another agreed. Evelyn's expression hardened for just a moment. Then Malcolm saw it. Heras moved toward the ballroom exit. One brief glance. Less than a second. He almost missed it. Amara didn't. She was already looking toward the same doorway. Then she whispered 4 words. She is expecting someone. And the mystery changed shape entirely. 4 minutes. What do you mean she's expecting someone? Malcolm asked quietly. Amara looked up at him. I think somebody was supposed to arrive before you sign. Worried glances moved around the board table. Evelyn shook her head immediately. This has gone far enough. The composure was still there. But the warmth had left it entirely. Every minute of delay increases risk for the company, she said. Agreements like this have windows. Malcolm turned toward her slowly. The company can survive a delay. He glanced at the missing file notice on his assistant's tablet. What it cannot survive is signing the wrong document. Murmurs of agreement moved through the board. Evelyn looked away. Malcolm noticed something then. A folder on the table near Evelyn's position. Slightly open. Used enough to reveal several pages inside. What's in that folder? He asked. Legal notes. Show me. For the first time all evening, she paused before responding. The pause lasted less than a second. But the room saw it. Show me, Malcolm said again. Evelyn slowly handed over the folder. Malcolm opened it carefully. Meeting schedules. Transaction summaries. Estándar legal memos. Then one page stopped him. A visitor authorization form. He had never seen the name printed on it. Neither, apparently, had his executive team. Who is Daniel Mercer? He asked. The question carried through the ballroom. Evelyn's expression changed. Not dramatically. Not enough for most people to notice. Amara noticed. Malcolm noticed. And the room felt colder. A consultant, Evelyn answered. For whom? For the transaction. A board member immediately shook his head. We didn't hire any consultant by that name. Another checked his phone. Nothing in procurement. Malcolm looked at the authorization timestamp. Submitted 2 hours earlier. He looked toward the revolving doors. Then back at Evelyn. Is this the person you were waiting for? She opened her mouth. At that exact moment, the elevator at the far end of the ballroom chimed softly. Avery had turned. The doors opened. A man in a dark suit stepped onto the polished marble floor. A silver briefcase in one hand. Measured confidence in every step. Amara saw his face. And whispered something that made Malcolm's blood run cold. That is the man from my drawing. The ballroom stopped breathing. The man crossed the floor with the ease of someone who had arrived exactly where he expected to be. His suit was immaculate. His expression was controlled. His has swept the room the way eyes do when they're already performing a calculation. Nobody seemed to recognize him. Yet his arrival felt connected to everything. Amara tightened her grip on the notebook. That's him, she said quietly. Malcolm looked at her. You're certain? She nodded. He was standing near the table during the presentation. The man continued walking until he reached the edge of the stage. Then he stopped. He has completed their survey of the room before settling on Malcolm. For one brief moment, his gaze shifted toward Evelyn Carter. A glance. Half a second. But in a room already looking for exactly that, half a second was enough. Malcolm saw it. Evelyn saw him. Both immediately looked away. Mr. Reed, the man said, smiling politely. I apologize for arriving late. Malcolm did not return the smile. Who are you? Daniel Mercer. He extended a hand. It remained suspended in empty air before he slowly lowered it. There is no consultant agreement under that name, a board member said flatly. Daniel adjusted his tie. I was invited as an independent reviewer. By whom? Malcolm asked. Before he could answer, Amara spoke. Ask him what's inside the briefcase. Avery had turned toward her. Daniel froze. Used for an instant. A barely visible compression of his expression. Then he laughed softly. Business documents. Amara held his gaze without blinking. Then open it. The confidence began draining from his face in real time. Malcolm watched it happen. That information is confidential, Daniel said. Not anymore, Malcolm replied. The room went still. Daniel looked toward Evelyn. An instinctive reflex. A mistake. This time every person in the ballroom saw it. Cameras lifted slowly. Evelyn remained motionless, but the color had left her face. Malcolm stepped forward. Open the briefcase. Daniel's fingers moved to the silver latches. The click was very loud in the silence. Then again. Click. The briefcase opened. A collective gasp moved through the ballroom. Inside there were multiple copies of a contract. Not one. Not two. More than a dozen. Each carrying different signatures. Different amendments. Different ownership structures. Malcolm stared at the documents. One page bore the logo of Reed Global Holdings. Another contained terms he had never seen. Amara slowly opened her notebook again. She pointed toward the stack of papers. And whispered 7 words that changed the entire direction of the evening. That is not the final target. The statement dropped into the silence like something falling from a great height. Avery had turned toward her. Amara turned her notebook around. Her finger pointed to a small symbol she had copied into the corner of one of her sketches. A geometric logo. Simple lines. The kind of thing designed to be ignored. The same logo printed on the hidden contracts. The same logo stitched onto the briefcase lining. Malcolm looked at the sketch carefully. Whose badge carried that symbol, he asked. Amara slowly lifted her eyes toward the front of the ballroom. Several people turned instinctively, following her gaze across the rows of executives and board members. Amara pointed. Not at Daniel. Not at Evelyn. At someone else. A man sitting 3 seats from Malcolm's position at the executive table. A man who had been present at every major decision of the evening. A man who had said very little. Him, Amara said quietly. Gregory Cho, Chief Strategic Advisor of Reed Global Holdings. Silver-eyed. Immaculately dressed. 15 years at the company. Trusted beyond question. He looked up with something almost like genuine surprise as every head in the room swiveled toward him. This is absurd, he said, with a short nervous laugh. A child points at me and suddenly everyone forgets common sense? Several people looked uncertain. The accusation felt impossible. Malcolm knew Gregory's family. Gregory knew his. But as the silence stretched longer, something uncomfortable was settling in. Amara flipped to another page in the notebook. She pointed to a line of tiny sketches. A watch. A tie clip. A conference badge. Most badges tonight were plain, she said. His was different. Gregory reached for the badge clip to his jacket. To latte. Malcolm had already seen it. A small geometric logo in the corner. Almost invisible. Almost. Gregory removed the badge. It's a sponsor logo. Nothing more. One board member searched the symbol on a tablet. Another did the same. Their expressions changed. Malcolm watched. What is it? The board member swallowed. The logo belongs to an investment consortium. Which one? One that's been pursuing hostile acquisitions through intermediary companies for nearly a decade. The words echoed through the ballroom. Gregory's face lost color. Daniel Mercer closed his eyes. Evelyn Carter looked toward the exit. Then one of Malcolm's attorneys rushed forward with a laptop. Mr. Reed. We recovered part of the deleted file. The attorney placed the laptop on the table and opened a recovered metadata report. A list of recent edits appeared on the screen. Malcolm's eyes moved down the list. Then stopped. The final modification to the contract had been made less than 2 hours earlier. The user account responsible carried a name nobody expected. Not Daniel Mercer. Not Evelyn Carter. Not even Gregory Shaw. Thomas Bennett. Chief Information Officer. 17 years of service. The silence that followed was absolute. Pale light from the laptop screen reflected across every face around the table. Nobody moved. Malcolm stared at the name as if repetition might change what it said. It didn't. Across the ballroom, Thomas Bennett stood near a cluster of senior staff members. His expression was blank. Not defensive. Not frightened. Blank. Thomas, Malcolm said. The single word compressed everything. Thomas looked up. I did not alter the contract. His answer came immediately. Though immediately. Amara noticed. You didn't ask which contract, she said softly. Several people turned toward her. Thomas froze. Less than a second. But the hesitation had already happened. Malcolm felt the knot in his chest tighten. The observation was simple. Almost a smile. Yet completely impossible to argue past. Thomas looked toward the laptop. Because there has been only one topic all evening. Reasonable. Almost. A cybersecurity analyst stepped forward with another tablet. Sir, there's more. He swallowed. The account was used from Thomas Bennett's credentials. But the login location doesn't match his office. A map appeared on the screen. Markers slid across Manhattan. One blinked red. Less than 3 blocks from the hotel. A private office suite. Not connected to Reed Global in any system. Who leases that office? Malcolm asked. The analyst searched. The answer appeared. His eyes widened. The same consortium connected to the logo on the contracts. A collective sound moved through the ballroom. Amara opened her notebook once more. Between 2 pages, a folded receipt. She unfolded it carefully and placed it on the table. A catering delivery. Completed that afternoon. A handwritten signature at the bottom. The person who had accepted the delivery. The person who had entered that private office suite less than 2 hours before the signing ceremony. Malcolm looked at the signature. His eyes widened. Lauren Ayes. Executive Assistant. 11 years. For the first time that night, the trail no longer led toward a stranger. It led directly into his inner circle. Every eye in the room followed Lauren Hayes' trembling hand as she pointed toward the front row. Malcolm turned slowly. Gregory Shaw remained seated. Silver hair catching the chandelier light. Hands folded. Expression unchanged. Not immediately. He simply sat there, watching the room arrive at what he already knew. A low murmur spread. Then another. Malcolm felt something settle in his chest that was worse than anger. Disappointment. The specific, heavy disappointment of recognizing betrayal in a face you know well. Gregory? Malcolm's voice barely cleared the quiet. Gregory exhaled slowly. Closed his eyes. Then opened them. I never wanted it to happen this way. Gasps. Board members staring in disbelief. Reporters lifting cameras. Lauren lowering her head. Malcolm remained still. How long? He asked. Gregory looked toward the skyline beyond the glass. Thousands of lights across Manhattan. Longer than you think. The answer struck harder than any denial. Amara Johnson stepped quietly closer to the table. She watched Gregory with the careful attention of someone who has finally found the missing piece. Gregory noticed her. A sad smile. You're very observant, he said. She didn't smile back. You kept looking at the contract all night, she said. But never at Mr. Reed. Gregory's expression shifted. Everyone else watched him, she continued. You watched the paper. The room went silent. Gregory looked down. One board. Member shook his head. Why? Gregory laughed. But there was no lightness in it. Because loyalty doesn't pay forever. I looked at Malcolm. I convinced myself I deserved more. Nobody interrupted. Not the reporters. Not the board members. Not even the attorneys. Gregory reached into his jacket. He removed a small flash drive and placed it on the table. Everyone understood the significance of the object immediately despite its size. What is that? Malcolm asked. Gregory looked at him directly. For the first time all evening, the calculation was completely gone from his face. Only exhaustion remained. The real plan. He pushed the drive toward Malcolm. Every email. Every draft. Every transfer. It's all there. Malcolm stared at the device. Then Amara noticed something no one else had seen. A small handwritten label attached to the side. She leaned forward. Her eyes widened. Because the name written on the label was not Gregory Shaw. Malcolm carefully picked up the flash drive and turned it toward the light. 3 handwritten words. Jonathan Reed Archive. A wave of confusion moved through the ballroom. Malcolm felt his heart stagger. Jonathan Reed. His older brother. The man who had helped launch the company 2 decades ago, who had retired years earlier when his health no longer allowed him to stay. Who had moved away from public life quietly, without ceremony. Malcolm looked at Gregory. Why is my brother's name on this? Gregory lowered his head. Because none of this started with me. The room erupted. Malcolm's expression hardened. Explain. Gregory took a slow breath. 5 years ago, Jonathan discovered irregular acquisition activity targeting the company. He started collecting evidence. Quietly. He believed someone inside the organization was feeding information to outside investors. Malcolm stared at him. Why didn't he tell me? Gregory gave a sad smile. He tried. The answer landed with the weight of something that had been carried for a long time. Gregory looked toward the windows. Every time he got close, the trail disappeared. Files vanished. Accounts changed. Meetings cancelled. He became convinced the network was larger than any single person. The ballroom remained silent. Before he retired, Gregory continued, he gave me the archive. He wanted me to finish what he started. A pause. But somewhere along the way, he stopped investigating and started negotiating. The honesty in his voice carried no pride. Only regret. Amara watched quietly from beside the table. She understood now. Gregory had not created the trap. He had allowed himself to become part of it. Malcolm handed the flash drive to the cybersecurity team. Within minutes, the contents appeared across the giant presentation screens that had been prepared for the signing ceremony. Gasps moved through the ballroom in waves. Thousands of emails. Financial records. Meeting transcripts. Sale companies linked to investment groups. Hidden agreements. Manipulated contracts. Staged transactions. Years of evidence assembled by a man no one in this room had been thinking about. Every missing piece now in its place. Daniel Mercer lowered his head. Evelyn Carter began quietly crying. Lauren Hayes covered her mouth. Board members stared at the screens in disbelief. The truth had finally arrived. Not through accusation. Not through guesswork. Through records. Through evidence. Through a brother who had been collecting the truth in silence for 5 years before handing it to the one person he still trusted. Malcolm looked around the ballroom. The deal was finished. The trap had failed. Red Global Holdings was safe. Thousands of employees would keep their jobs. Years of work had been protected. Yet his attention drifted back toward Amara. She stood quietly beside the table, notebook pressed against her chest. She hadn't asked for attention. Hadn't they asked to be recognized? She had simply refused to stay silent when silence would have been easier. Then one final file appeared on the screen. A video message, recorded years earlier. Frozen. Waiting. The ballroom went silent once more. The giant screens flickered as the video file began to load. Nobody spoke. The city lights beyond the glass seemed distant now. Reduced to quiet reflections against the dark. Then the image appeared. Jonathan Reed sat behind a wooden desk in a quiet office. His hair was gray than Malcolm remembered. His eyes held the steady warmth of someone who had made peace with a difficult decision. For a moment, the years seemed to disappear. A collective stillness settled across the entire ballroom. If you're watching this, Jonathan began, then something I feared has finally come to pass. Malcolm felt his throat tighten. Jonathan continued calmly. I spent years building this company alongside people I trusted. Most of them deserved that trust. A few did not. A pause. The painful part is that betrayal rarely arrives wearing a stranger's face. It usually arrives looking like a friend. Several people glanced toward Gregory Shaw. He remained seated, staring at the floor. If evidence from this archive has surfaced, Jonathan said, then I want one thing understood. The purpose of this investigation was never revenge. It was protection. Protection for employees. For families. For every person whose future is tied to this company. The ballroom stayed completely silent. Amara Johnson stood beside Malcolm, her notebook still pressed against her chest. Jonathan's expression softened. And Malcolm, if you're standing there right now, I hope you remember something our father taught us. A quiet pause. Success is not measured by what you keep. It is measured by what you protect. Malcolm felt his throat close. Around him, board members lowered their eyes. Investors sat quietly. Even the reporters had stopped writing. The words carried more weight than any contract. Jonathan smiled gently from the screen. And one more thing. Another pause. If the truth came out because someone had the courage to speak when everyone else stayed silent, make sure that person knows they matter. Malcolm slowly looked down at Amara. The little girl blinked in surprise. Jonathan's image faded. The screen went dark. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then the ballroom filled with applause. Not loud. Not celebratory. Grateful. Sincere. The kind of applause that sounds like relief. Malcolm turned toward Amara. Tears stood in his eyes. But his smile had returned. Not the confident smile of a man about to close a deal. The grateful smile of a man who had been given a second chance, just before it was too late. He knelt beside her. You saved more people tonight than you know. Amara looked down at her notebook. I just paid attention, she said. Malcolm laughed softly. Exactly. In the weeks that followed, the fraudulent agreements were cancelled. The hidden consortium was exposed through careful legal proceedings. Rayet Global Holdings remained independent. Thousands of employees kept their positions. New oversight policies were created throughout the organization. But the symbol people remembered most was not a contract. Not a flash drive. Not a courtroom verdict. It was a worn notebook carried by an 8-year-old girl who refused to look away when everyone else had decided there was nothing to see. The notebook was eventually displayed inside the lobby of Reed Global headquarters, enclosed in glass, beside a small plaque. Employees passed it every morning. Every afternoon. Every evening on their way out the door. And beneath the glass, in simple letters chosen by Malcolm Reed himself, were the words that remained long after everything else had been said. The truth does not need the loudest voice. It only needs someone brave enough to speak.